So, Pinaki, did you know that 73.6% of all statistics are false?
I thought it was 80% myself.
Yeah, no, there was like an actual, I think there was an article and it said it's 73.6. Someone actually collected every single statistic that ever existed and found out that 73.6% of them are completely false.
Really? I thought that stat in itself was false.
It is false. No, it is false. It's all false.
You had me for a second there, though. You did have me. I was gonna say, really?
I'm not surprised I had you on that one, Pinaki. I won't lie. But I mean, at the end of the day, even actually just to prove the point, I think data it's seductive. There's a seductive quality about data, about evidence, and once there is a stat or there's a number or there's some kind of proof point or evidence, I find in most organizations, that's the go-ahead to proceed with something or to make a decision on something. Do you find that to be the case?
Yeah, it is interesting and alluring, right? Like you even notice that like this whole this boom in infographics and information design came into the mix. And, don't get me wrong, I love information design. And I do love how we could have data tell stories. But you're right. And I think the impetus for this episode is really around like decision making and how data plays in a part in that, right? And I think we have such an interesting relationship with decision making and data and decision making and following our gut instincts, right? The idea for this one had come up because Tarek Kamal, he's the CEO of Circle, and we were having drinks one evening right before a conference, and he told me this wild story. I will paraphrase it incredibly because he could tell it much better than I can, but essentially, Tarek, he's a huge college basketball fan, also technical, analytical genius, right? So Tarek came up with an algorithm framework that he could run scenarios and give college basketball teams the best recommendation, right? And so he told me the story of how he spent 1 year trying to get in touch with his head coach of his favorite team. They weren't winning, and he had such a trouble getting them. Eventually, about a year in, they're losing. Coach gives them a call. Long story short, they follow the recommendation, start winning. And as soon as they kind of hit this kind of winning zone, coach kind of reverts back to what they were doing before. They start losing again. Long story short, then the coaching staff changes and the story kind of ends. But I thought it was like fascinating that here we have like data that shows you can do this. That didn't kind of seal the deal, right? Because he spent a while not even getting back to Tarek. And then actually when they used the data and the model and started winning, that almost didn't seal the deal. That almost didn't seal the deal because they kind of went back to what was natural or normal for them. So it kind of made me think that, we don't really make decisions with our minds or very logically. I think we make a lot of decisions with our hearts as well. And I thought that would make an interesting episode. And how do we kind of make decisions happen based on data or lack of data and things like that?
I'm looking forward to jumping right into this. I've always felt like data points and evidence, it's so important. But often I find that it's used as like a security blanket to make decisions feel more defensible if in case it doesn't go wrong. So, if you make a decision that was based on data or evidence and it goes wrong, at least you can go back and say, well, look at the data. I mean, it told us that this was the right thing to do, versus if you trust your gut and it doesn't work out, then you'll be accountable to that decision. It's like, well, why'd you make the decision? It just felt right to me. And so when it doesn't work out, so the risks feel like it's higher when there isn't evidence or data to back up the decision. And, it's not to say that one is better than the other, but I feel like there's probably room for a stronger balance between the two.
It's what makes the better scapegoat at this point, right? That's what you're looking for. So everybody, welcome to Why Does It Feel So Wrong? On this show, Chris and I are talking about the things that we observe in the work world that are just ripe for discussion. Basically, let's ask some questions like, does this make sense? Should we be more mindful of this? Is there a better way, right? Because we're humans and we've built these complex survival instincts over generations to cope with the world. But that world looks much different today in the world of work. And we need to adapt ourselves. And our workplaces need to be more human, right? So let's dive into this one, right? Like decision making and data and how that plays into it. I think one of the wildest stories around this was around like valuations of companies, right? I think that's a very interesting kind of topic. And when we're kind of perusing this topic when we talked about it, but we're talking about WeWork and Regus, right? Essentially, you've probably all heard of WeWork. Some of you might have heard of Regus, right? And I thought this was just so fascinating about the valuation of companies where WeWork was valuated multiple times higher as a valuation of a company than Regus was. And what the stats were, what the data was that WeWork was operating at a total profit loss. They were not making money. They were losing money, while Regus was actually profitable for multiple years. So, right, like the data in this model somehow valuated this company that was not profiting, but possibly had the potential of great profit way higher than a company that was steady, fast, and profiting, right? So there was kind of one part about it, which was like, WeWork had a very charismatic leader, right? And we all know that. And so that ability to play with our hearts as well as our minds made a bunch of people make a bunch of decisions that helped to kind of poof this valuation up there, right? Let's analyze this one, right? So why does it feel so wrong to make a hard decision, right? Like, and what role does data play, right? Do we need data to help us make decisions? Do we seek data just as validation, like you said? Like, do we need to constantly benchmark, right? Or can we trust our gut? Can we trust stories and anecdotes and gut reactions, right? What's your take on that? How do you approach situations like that?
It's funny because one of the things that a lot of our clients at Gallagher, they're looking for communication support to support total rewards, like things like employee health and dental benefit plans, things like that. And what tends to happen is HR leaders or total rewards leaders and benefit specialists, they'll go through the process of benchmarking against the industry and just kind of saying what is everyone else providing in terms of coverage and what their health plans are, which makes a ton of sense. You want it to be competitive. You want to make sure that you've got something that, in addition to how they're paid, they're getting a great set of benefits and possibly a pension plan. But what happens is they just get so lost in the process of we're just benchmarking that one of the things that I looked at was the career pages of a lot of organizations just to see how do they talk about benefits. And the same language kept on coming up regularly, which was we offer a competitive benefits plan. And I would ask people, what does that actually mean? When you say you have a competitive benefits plan, are you saying that's a good thing? Is that what is it? It just sounds like a very underwhelming way to describe this investment or commitment you're making to people's health. And they would say, well, I guess it really doesn't mean anything at all. It just means we're competing. We're in it. We're not saying we have an amazing plan. It's almost a way of saying we have a benefits plan literally because everybody else has one. We just don't want to be the one weird company that doesn't have a dental plan. Well, that's just it. And I think if you're going to be spending, conservatively thousands of dollars and often tens of thousands of dollars per person per year on these benefit plans, I feel like you can do a lot better than just talking about it as being competitive, because it's just a recipe for people to just take it for granted completely. And I think the positioning really gets lost because the process is, well, we base it on benchmarking. The stats tell us this is a competitive plan and this is what we're going to go out. And it's kind of funny because you're making this such a huge investment and you're not taking the time or care to think about how am I going to position this with our people? Because really what it does represent is you're committed to helping people feel healthy, feel mentally well, help them achieve financial security. There's much bigger, better words to use to describe why you're doing this as opposed to, well, we benchmarked it, everyone else is doing it. And it's kind of this thing where, because of the process, because of what the data was telling us, it's almost like we're telling people exactly how we got to this. And this is the only reason why we're doing it. It's because everyone else is doing it. And I think it's an opportunity. It's a missed opportunity for a lot of organizations to package it and position it in a much stronger way than just simply relaying back what the data told you.
Yeah, I think you kind of open up an interesting trap and a nice opening for a good marketer to come in and set the right words to that, right? But when you're kind of like looking at for benchmarking, I think one of the big ahas of that conversation right there was that let's not benchmark to just do like the same as everyone else or just one step higher. And I guess that's really an interesting thing, right? When you're just looking at something like, all right, what's everyone else doing? So we could just do something a little bit better than that. Instead of looking at it in terms of like, how do we revolutionize this whole thing? Or how do we take it to the total new level, right? So it's interesting when we kind of like look at data, right, as what we said before, like as a scapegoat. So it's kind of like keeping it safe and not so risky. And I suppose that's where data comes into a lot of places, right? Like we try to use data to eliminate risk in order for us to make the right decision.
That's exactly it. I mean, it's like you and I were saying, it does make a decision more defensible. And I think about it as, I think the comparator is, when we hire new staff or new talent and we look at recruits, and obviously you'll look at LinkedIn, you'll look at their resume, you'll look at their experience, their credentials. And this all tells a really important story. But sometimes when you're hiring, you'll have someone who's got all the right credentials, but your gut tells you a different story, which is there's another candidate who doesn't have the same amount of experience or the same amount of certifications or things like that. But every fiber of your being is telling you that other candidate is going to do a better job and be more successful in the role. Yet the pressure is always on us to hire the person that just looks way better on paper. And when you think about why that is, it's because if it doesn't work out for that person and they don't do a good job, one is way easier to defend in terms of a decision than the other. And so when I talk about the balance between trusting your gut, your instinct versus what is the evidence and the data telling you, I wonder if there's room for a stronger balance so that, because often our gut is accurate. I think at some point, Pinaki, you and I were talking about Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, and he opens up that book with, that story. Do you know the story of how the Getty Museum in LA acquired that ancient statue?
Yeah, you should say it again, because that was 2005. I kind of don't remember that story right now.
I mean, there's a specific type of ancient statue. It's really rare. It's called the Kuros. And so the dealer that was selling this Kuros, was claiming that it was from 6th century BC. He had the paperwork to prove its validity. And so the Getty Museum brought in geologists, and they used some high-tech science to determine that, this marble, the dolomite marble, it came from an ancient quarry. And so they were able to verify, this is from 6th century BC. The legal team also took a look at the paperwork, and they were able to confirm the authenticity of the documents. And so all the geologists, the legal teams, everyone was confirming the legitimacy of the Kuros. And so the Getty ended up spending something like $10 million to acquire this incredibly rare statue. So, I mean, everything seems like it's fine. Like, it seems like this is the way things would normally go. But one of the things that happened was art experts started to come to visit and see this statue. And almost invariably, all of them looked at it and they were convinced that something was off. Something was wrong with the statue's authenticity. And none of them could actually explain why. They couldn't actually put their finger and say, well, they never hold their hand this way, or, you know, the way the marble looks is something wrong. Not a single one of them could actually explain what was wrong with it. They just said something just didn't look right. Their gut was telling them something was wrong. And so they couldn't articulate what it was. And so what they did was the Getty was taking a lot of this feedback, because almost every art expert was saying the same thing. And literally none of them could actually explain what was actually wrong. So the Getty dug deeper and they found out eventually that it actually was a forgery. Someone had figured out that you could actually age marble and make it seem ancient just by using potato mold, or there's something that they use, and they figured it out. And they took a closer look at the paperwork, and they eventually found out that it was forged. And so in this case, you know, art trumped science. I mean, all the evidence suggested this was legitimate, and it turned out to be a $10 million lesson in that, you know, sometimes you can actually trust your gut as well and dig a little bit deeper if you have to.
That's so true. And I think Blink is a great book for that, right? Because there's so many like stats and stories that are just like that, like, right? Like the trusting your gut to whatnot. There's another one in there that talks about like doctors at a hospital asking questions in order to and using an algorithm in order to identify heart disease. I think if you're interested in this topic, Blink is definitely a book to take a look at. It also reminds me of Freakonomics. A lot of that book talked about like correlation and causation and things like that, which I think is very interesting to kind of like think about, because those are all things that in a snap moment, like we're making decisions based on sometimes. And sometimes it's not a snap moment. Maybe it's more than that. You know, when you were talking before the Blink story, you were talking about this like gut versus data. And I actually, the nerd in me had to actually draw this matrix out on this paper where it's like, there's, you know, across the top, there's like, do I follow my gut? Yes or no? Do I follow the data? Yes or no? And, you know, as I was kind of drawing it out, yeah, you know, if the data and the gut are the same, then yeah, of course we're going to do that. And if neither your data nor your gut want to do it, then definitely we're not going to do it. But then those two boxes of like, you know, data and gut, it's like, which one would you take? It's such an interesting thing to think about when making decisions or something like that.
And do you find that data more often? Do you find that data trumps gut, or do you find that there's a balance, or do you find that gut sometimes trumps data? What has been your experience?
Yeah, and this is totally not proven. So just to be straight, I think, or my hypothesis is, people go with their gut more so than the data. And if the data does not match up with what their gut wants, they will find the data to match up with what the gut wants, right? Similar to what you just said about the story about Blink. I mean, I remember years ago, I was a user experience. We were working on the website for a major bank and was analyzing navigation systems of other banks or whatnot. And a lot of like data and research went into it and things like that. And I realized that like I could manipulate or show the data in ways that'll sway me one way or another. So it's going to realize that, you know what, data can be manipulated to tell a different story. Hell, when I was on the debate team, way back when, we had to use books, but basically in a debate team, there's an affirmative and a negative team, and you're debating, but you essentially work off of the same book, and the same book has all of the stats, pros and cons. It's just a matter of how you weave that story to influence the judge here. And I think that's really what like the world is like right now, because making decisions is a difficult game, right? Many times we say that was a good decision or that was a bad decision. And I think the truth is we don't know that for a fact until after we've made the decision and seen the outcome, right? So in a sense, is there such a thing as like good decisions, bad decisions, or good outcomes, bad outcomes? Because it's really difficult to get over the idea that the decisions we make, or at least the more complicated ones, are made with just this limited information that's in front of us, right? So there's so much we don't know before making the decision that we're just using a probability thing. And that's where data comes into play. It helps us to alleviate that gut feeling that I think I want to make this decision, but is this the right thing to do? And because especially when the stakes are high, right? Another book that I reference is from Annie Duke. She has this fabulous book called Thinking in Bets. Annie Duke is a world championship poker player, and she has some fascinating thoughts around decision making. And I know you were talking about like Annie Duke as well, so I think we shared like that same passion for similar authors here. But does that make sense as far as decision making and whatnot? Do you follow your gut or go for like data? How do you do it?
I mean, what I generally love to do is start with my gut and then look for data to validate the gut. And I think that's probably the sort of that order of operations, right? So not starting with data and only relying on data, because sometimes you can almost find data to tell you almost any kind of story, right? One way or the other. And to your point about Annie Duke, we also have to be careful about the outcomes of your decision, because sometimes you'll make the right decision, but the outcome will be wrong. And sometimes you'll make the wrong decision, but the outcome will be right. And so from a poker perspective, she sees this all the time where amateur players will make a terrible decision, but they'll still win the hand. And then that validates their own thinking about, I'm going to keep on doing this terrible decision because I think I'm going to keep on winning. So they'll start to extrapolate based on this one hand sample, and they just didn't make the right call versus making the right call and still losing the hand. And most poker professionals like Annie herself will understand that most of the time I'm going to win this hand. So even though I lost it this time and I'm bitter about it, it's fine. You can have all the emotions, but it's understanding what went into that decision. And a big part of what poker players do is obviously they're playing the numbers, they're playing the statistics, the probabilities, but sometimes they also have to trust their gut. And they have to think about, why the other player might be doing something. And sometimes their gut will just tell them, I have to do this, and trust my gut. I have to make this call, or I have to fold this amazing hand.
There's this fantastic poker game in India called Timpati, and it's a 3-card poker. And the way it starts is, every round. It's more like regular, like 7-card poker, but it's 3-card, and every round you're putting in an ante to stay in the game. The thing about this game is you could play blind, meaning that you don't look at your cards, but if you play blind, your ante is half of everyone else's who's seen your cards. So it's such a fascinating kind of like thing of like trusting your guts. Like, I haven't even seen these cards, but I'm betting on them, and it's surprising to see how many people I've seen win on a total blind game, right? And that's a fascinating thing about poker. One last thing that Annie Duke said that always sticks with me is poker is more of a strategic game than chess, as most people would think chess is more of a strategic game. But like in chess, though, you see everything in front of you as it is. All of the pieces, where they are, where they could move, it all. But in poker, there are so many unknowns. Like, you don't see the cards in the other person's hands, and you don't know what's in the flop, things like that. So there's factoring unknowns in poker that makes it more of a game of strategy. The funny thing about decision making and these books, right, is they've only been really covered from the 1990s onwards. That's one of the things I was like researching behind on this, is like all of the books that we just talked about on decision making are relatively new. So this is an entirely somewhat young field that hasn't even been really like tapped into much.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And the reality is that we're as humans, we're emotional uh, beings, and that plays into it. There used to be a stock in Canada, used to be one of the absolute biggest stocks in Canada. It was Nortel. Used to be called Northern Telecom, Nortel, and it was the darling of the investment industry. But one of the things that started to happen with this stock is, as it was rising, investors would start to come in at different points, and then eventually, a lot of us know that the stock would eventually plummet down to being worthless. And the psychology of investors is really fascinating, because let's say you buy a stock at $100 and it goes up to $130. You feel great. Like, it's like, man, I just made $30. So you're holding on to it because you want to do even better. And then when it goes down from 130 to 115, instead of thinking about it like I just made $15, you're thinking I just lost $15 from 130. And so now you're like, oh, I gotta hold on to this because I want it to go back to 130. I can't believe I lost this money. And then it goes down to 100. And then, it's still the same narrative. I want to make that money back. So then it goes down to 90. Now you're down $10 and so on and so forth. So it keeps on going down. And people have a really hard time divorcing what's really going on with the numbers versus their own personal feelings and what they feel about something. And I always find it's fascinating, because investors go through this cycle of emotions all the time.
Yeah, there's this loss aversion. Is the like term around that, and it like this psychologically we are more likely to act if we're going to lose something than if we were to gain something, right? And that's kind of used a lot in like right, data and in sales, right? It's like, if I call you up in the morning and says, hey, I have this stock idea for you, and it's gonna get you $100 this week, as opposed to, hey, I have this like stock tip that's gonna save you from losing $100 this week, right? Which call would you take, on that side? Because of course I don't want to lose $100 a week, but do I have the time or effort or whatever to make $100 and all of that stuff?
Yeah, I guess just to wrap things up here, Pinaki, I think that the main thing that I think captured our imagination for you and I was not so much that there's anything wrong with data. It's more the idea that data can tell you, sometimes it can tell you the wrong story, sometimes often it'll tell you the right story, but finding that ability to combine good data and good evidence with what your instinct, your experience, your gut is telling you, because so often it will lead you down the right path. And there's a reason, instinctively, we do have great instincts. There was a book years ago. It was called The Wisdom of the Crowds. And there was, I think it was like an agricultural fair. And they basically had a pig on display, and people had to guess its weight. And so you would think that the pig farmers who do this for a living, that they would actually be the most accurate. And what they ended up finding is that en masse, the entire crowd, the average guess was very accurate. In fact, it was much more accurate than any individual pig farmer. And just the idea that you can kind of trust your instinct. They had another story, I think it was in the same book, where they showed a picture of a lecturer or a professor at a university before they even met this person. And they asked them to describe this person's characteristics, like what's their personality like? Are they strict? Are they this? Or are they that? And so they all made their guesses just based literally on a picture. And then at the end of the semester, after they gotten to really work closely with this professor and know this person really, really well, they checked to see if their initial guesses about this person, just based on their picture, were accurate. And they found very, very often, in fact, way more often than not, that they were accurate just by taking a look at the picture. And so there is room for trusting our gut or instinct based on nothing more than just a picture, or in this case, just taking a wild guess at an agricultural fair.
So I love these stories, right? Because it's just like these stories about like how data talks about gut and stuff like that, right? And so it's incredibly meta at this very moment. But I think there's definitely like a few things to like think about to like kind of I guess get in my like final thoughts before we close out on this one, right? Like one is like, decision making is a thing, and like there could be lots of things that pause you or stop you from making that decision. One of the things we have to do is to make the decision and be open about the fact that, you know what, you're making the best decision based on what you have, and trudge on with it. I think I've seen so many times like, oh, we want to get this data and all the reports in and everything like that so we can make the decision. And it happens a lot with like employee experience surveys and things like that. We'll ask the company, hey, how's the experience? How's everything going? They'll take the survey. They'll be about 6 months in before they get all the results. And then maybe they're going to take action. So I'm like, you know what? The whole landscape could have changed at that point. So, right, just really be mindful in yourself when you're looking for data, why you're looking for data, and what action we're going to do with that data, right? Because I think, one way or another, like you have a belief, follow your gut, and I think that'll get you there as well, right? If you are an overthinker, just picked up a book by John Acuff called Soundtracks, which I think is a fabulous book for, if you're finding yourself at that place where, I'm stalled in making the decision or taking action. I think it's super important. I picked up the book and I had to put it down because I have the opposite problem. I take action too much and I have to slow myself down at times. And so I get myself in trouble. That's how I think we solve problems. I think also prototyping is the new research. If you're looking for data to prove or disprove something, do a minimum viable product, test something out, ask people, and that sort of thing too, because there's nothing worse than like having data to stunt your forward progress.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think part of the reason why we tend to get romanced by data is because I think this decision inertia comes from that fear of failure. You don't want to make a decision that fails. None of us want to fail, and none of us want to make a decision that ends in a negative outcome or consequence. But I think the reality is, some decisions are not going to work out, even if you do the right things. And I think the idea is looking at how does the data support what your gut instinct is, but ultimately being okay with the fact that not every decision you make is going to work out. And so I think there's a balance. I think there's a balance between you, who just make decisions, versus some people who just are in this never-ending cycle of, I need to find more data to support this decision. I'm just so scared because I don't want to get this one wrong. It's a big investment, those kinds of things. And so I think that there's really what we're preaching here is balance. Absolutely, there is. And yeah, because I can't say that my extreme is the best either, even for myself. I'll say this quote and I'll close us out here. This one, Amos Tversky, he said, "When you are a pessimist and a bad thing happens, you live it twice. Once when you worry about it, and second when it happens." So think about that worry and overthinking things. That's it for our episode of Why Does It Feel So Wrong to Be Human at Work? Thank you for tuning in. I thought this was really interesting kind of play and following gut data and instincts and just talking about these things that sway our decisions here. So we'd love to know what your relationship is like with data and decision making. Are you prone to overthink? Are you like me and just take action? Do you follow your gut? Do you follow the data? What works for you? And how does that work out? Let us know. We're on LinkedIn. We're on TikTok. You can email us at whydoesitfeelsowrong@localwisdom.com. Thank you for listening. I'm Pinaki Kathiari, CEO at Local Wisdom and Actioneer. Joining me is my partner in pushing us to new things, Chris Lee,
Vice President of Communications at Gallagher. We are here to ask you, why does it feel so wrong to be human at work? Shout out to Local Wisdom. The folks at Local Wisdom take a very nimble approach to data in action. They never want to be in analysis paralysis or have clients wait months before moving forward. That's why we measure what we need to take a step forward and continue stepping and measuring where we want to be. Check us out, localwisdom.com. Make sure you follow us, and peace.